It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. If you go to emailrevealer.com, you can get an autographed copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator, but also to all different kinds of services there, asset searches, background reports. If you need to locate someone or identify somebody and you only have an email address, we can do that for you at emailrevealer.com. If you think your email account's been hacked and someone's reading your emails, we can monitor your account, tell you if anybody else is accessing your email account. Catfish investigations. And don't forget the online infidelity investigation. If you think your spouse, your boyfriend, your girlfriend's cheating on you, you give us their email address. We trace it back to online dating websites. So a lot of email-related stuff there at emailrevealer.com. Also digital forensics, computer forensics, cell phone forensics, recover deleted text messages, all kinds of wonderful services for you there at emailrevealer.com. We have today a returning guest, Brian Saady. And you could find his website, briansaady.com. The last time he was here, we were discussing his book, Drug War, A $1 Trillion Con Game. And you can find that on Amazon.com. You can find it on his website. And I believe it's also in the Opperman Report bookstore. Just came out with a brand new book that he's offering for free. It's a free book. America's Drug War is Devastating Mexico. I suppose it's a book that could write itself in the times we're living in. Brian, are you there?
I'm here.
Hey,
How's
man.
it going?
Oh, good. Thanks so much for coming back on the show, man. Thank you so much. Give us an idea.
Thank you.
Yeah. What's going on? America's Drug War is Devastating Mexico. What have you come up with?
Well, I mean, exactly. You pretty much hit the nail on the head there. It's a book that can write itself. Really, and we've seen a lot of headlines recently. Another journalist gets killed. There's another shootout with 20 people. People hanging from a bridge. We see all these different stories, and we see the statistics that, roughly about 100,000 people have been killed in the country over the last 10 years in the drug war. And in my opinion, I really wanted to write something that really went deeper, that really kind of illustrated just how badly our country's drug policy is affecting other countries, in particular Latin America, and in particular Mexico there. And like I said, we could talk a lot about some different countries as well, to where the American drug policy is adversely affecting the rest of the world. And I think that a lot of people don't really understand the real severity of what is happening down there. And I think we sort of get desensitized to just how badly things are going. And there's one example if you want to think about in all countries' history, the St. Valentine's Massacre that happened during the prohibition of alcohol, and 7 people were murdered. This gangland style shooting. That was sort of the prompt to change the prohibition. It was one of many events that 7 people died. But you look at today, that happens all the time, and nobody thinks really any of it. In fact, there was a story, it was in late December, early January. It wasn't just 7 people who were killed. There were 5 different politicians in Mexico who were killed over a 5-day period. And this kind of stuff happens a lot. So you can only imagine if politicians are getting murdered, what happens to the average person. The drug war, it affects their country in every way imaginable. There's just so many stories, and that's really what I wanted to get across to people, because again, everybody knows these kinds of things, but I don't think that they realize just how bad these things are. You know, we're well aware that the drug war in the United States domestically, you know, has been a horrible policy. It's been counterproductive. It's cost our country over $1 trillion in government spending, but the situation is actually it harms other countries even worse, far worse.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I'm 55 years old, right? And so I was growing up in the days of Miami Vice. You know, Miami Vice is, you know.
Okay.
You know, I even dressed like that, okay? I had one of those briefcases. Okay.
Hey, nothing wrong with it. You and basically everybody else.
Yeah, right. But the thing is, what happened to change from, like, Colombia being the supplier coming through Florida? Suddenly, 1 year, like a flip of a switch, all of that started coming through Mexico. How did that happen?
Well, that is a good question. Pretty much when Cali cartel fell, that was, you know, they were very, you know, aligned with the Colombian government there. Now, I mean, still, it's just sort of this battleground. It's not as though Colombia, you know, has lost power or anything. Colombia is still, last year I think, was still the top producer of cocaine. But a lot of it had to do with the way the cartels, they started to form these alliances with the Mexican cartels. Originally, you know, Colombia didn't, you know, Medellin and Cali, they didn't really have these business relationships with the Mexican cartels. They were viewed as competitors. Then eventually they sort of became business partners. And as that started happening, then, you know, the Mexicans, they started to cut them out. And that's kind of an oversimplification. But don't cry for the Colombian cartels. They're still doing very well. Although it's not quite as consolidated. It's really spread out over a lot of different crime groups. But yeah, and a lot of it has to do with Mexico also transitioning into different drugs. It's really they're one of the biggest producers of methamphetamine in the world. And it's also, last time I looked, I think they're this number 3 as far as the producer, as far as production of opium. So the cocaine, not so much, but, you know, marijuana, meth, and heroin, those are really the Mexican drugs. Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, that's really where you see most of the cocaine production coming from. And it's difficult to send that stuff directly from Colombia to the U.S., so you need those different transshipment points. So that's one of the biggest reasons why there is so much chaos in Mexico, because it just simple logistics. It borders the U.S., so, and in particular, those border cities like Tijuana, Juarez, Laredo, where the highest, you know, volume occurs, because that is such a valuable piece of real estate.
Yeah, like little towns like Naco and Nogales and stuff like that in Arizona. There was a ton of marijuana used to come over those borders back in the 80s. Now, you're saying, though, even now with all the grow operations going on here in the United States, there's still a lot of marijuana comes up from Mexico?
Less than in the past. That's actually one of the few drugs there has been a verifiable reduction in production. It's marijuana. It's pretty obvious because of legalization. But yeah, no, I mean, it's still obviously a pretty large producer, but it's the only one where we can actually see a demonstrable difference in production. And it's, again, just pretty simple. Legalization solves this problem. You know, and then, again, it's all because of the prohibition of drugs. Yeah.
Now, what about the Mexican gangs? Do they have any influence in the grow operations that go on here in North America?
I haven't come across that.
Okay.
That I don't know about. I wouldn't think so. Again, they don't really have that sort of influence. They have a tremendous influence in Mexico. I mean, drug money, it goes all the way to the top. It's been that way for a long time. The current president, Enrique Peña Nieto, there's all kinds of scandals that really point to drug money. His predecessors as well. It's just which drug cartels are you in bed with? there's a scandal called Monexgate. And Monex, it's a banking financial institution down in Mexico. And long story short, members of the Juarez cartel were laundering their money, and the money was starting to funnel its way into the campaign funds for the PRI, which is the dominant political party, the current dominant political party, who also holds the presidency. And there's just a lot of other stuff, all kinds of other stuff that really shows that the narco money, it doesn't just control the local politics. It really goes all the way to the top. So when you look at that, I don't really see why, again, I'm just speculating on your question as far as that. I don't see why they would risk exposure where they don't really have the same political power in the U.S. that they have in Mexico. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Now, I know that one of the richest men in the world lives in Mexico, right? And you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, Carlos Slim.
Yeah, right. I got a name. Okay, good. Now, how could I was just about to look up his name? Now, could it be any coincidence that the richest man in the world, one of the richest men in the world, is down there where all the drugs are coming through? Does he have any connection to the drug traffic?
I've read the rumors. I've never read anything that definitively proves it. The thing is, there's all kinds of corruption. It's not all narco corruption. Really, where he got a lot of his wealth, it goes back about 3 decades ago, at the Salinas presidency, and it's a really kind of interesting story. PBS did a great documentary on this, and he not only was the Salinas administration, they weren't just in bed with the drug traffickers. They were in bed with all of, basically the business oligarch in the country. And just to come to this private meeting before he's elected, you had to pay, I think it was like $1 million to sit at the table. And of course, that went in his pocket. And he just sort of made all these different backdoor deals where they privatized all these different industries. Carlos Slim, if I remember, he's a big telephone guy, so he got, what was essentially a government monopoly was then privatized, and there was no real competition. It was all handed over to one guy. So, and that's where he's made a lot of his wealth. Now, there are rumors, like I said, I've read about him, that he's connected, but I haven't seen anything to where I would feel comfortable in that. Although, you can suspect it, and it's sure, but I don't know of anything definitive.
What about Vicente Fox? What have you heard about Vicente Fox?
What about him?
Yeah, have you heard anything?
Oh, you mean he's he's pretty a vocal guy. I know he's a big Donald Trump critic. He kind of made a big name. A lot of Americans like him because he sort of pointed out, hey, the problems in Mexico are directly related to America's struggle for them. Now, and again, a lot of people like him for that reason, but at the same time, he's never really being very honest about that. There's one of Mexico's top journalists. Her name's Annabelle Hernandez. She wrote a book, Narcoland. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
I think I've heard of it, yeah.
Really well respected book. And long story short, she made the ties proving that this once obscure politician, Vicente Fox, basically came out of nowhere, all of a sudden gets this huge influx of cash, and it helps to launch him into, running and winning the presidency. And she makes the point, and I think proves it pretty adequately, that a lot of that money came from the Sinaloa cartel. And then when you start to look at the government under his leadership and his successor, is Felipe Calderon, they're both from the same party, and that was actually the opposition party. Because before Fox, the PRI, that party had literally been in power for 80-something years, unopposed. So Vicente Fox was the changing of the guard, right? And what happened was, everybody knows that, the Sinaloa cartel has been the most powerful drug organization for a long time. But what a lot of people don't realize is, well, first of all, Vicente Fox, he was the one who brought the military into the drug war. In other words, the military didn't do domestic law enforcement until he started to do that. That was 2005. Now, his successor, Felipe Calderon, he was the one who actually proudly launched their war on drugs, and he really escalated it. So the military's brought into the equation. There's now basically around 50,000 troops in Mexico actively, quote-unquote, fighting this war on drugs. But you have to really look at how those resources are used. And when that war was launched, it happened, coincidentally or not coincidentally, be in key locations and going against the Sinaloa cartel's rivals, weakening them in specific regions where the Sinaloa cartel wanted to expand, in particular Juarez. So, again, yeah, I get it, a lot of people like him. In particular, he's a very big Trump critic. And again, he is calling out the truth that we do need to end our war on drugs. It is causing a lot of their problems, but not really revealing the full truth.
Let me ask you a question now. If we look back throughout history, right, we see Iran-Contra, it's going on galore. They were bringing up coke. I've had Freeway Rick Ross on the show. We've covered that extensively.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. Sure. We've covered that galore. Done a ton of shows on Iran-Contra. Yeah. Oh yeah. I feel like I know all these guys at this point. I feel like we've all become friends. Like we could go into business together if you wanted to. but the thing is so much CIA involvement in bringing drugs up from South America, right? Does that continue to this day?
And I've always sort of split hairs a little bit on this because I wouldn't say necessarily the CIA themselves bring it, but their operatives, their assets, absolutely. That's a good question. Exactly which countries? I haven't seen a whole lot. I mean, you see it in Afghanistan where, again, the political, in other words, whoever our political allies are, and if their administration is tied to certain elements of drug trafficking, we look the other way. In Afghanistan, there's a literal hit list for different drug traffickers that are they're closely associated with the Taliban, versus there are a lot of drug traffickers that were very close to the Karzai administration. And the Karzai administration was obviously on the CIA's payroll, a close ally of the U.S. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Again, I've sort of split hairs on the fact a lot of people say CIA themselves trafficking in the cocaine, and I get why they say it, but I really more point out it's the CIA's assets.
Let me stop you there for a second because I had on you're familiar with Lynn Ives, the mother of the boys on the tracks, right down there in Mena, Arkansas. Her sons were killed on the railroad tracks down there in Mena, Arkansas. And I had her attorney on the show. What a great show. This guy is like a one-man law firm. He's trying to take on the whole U.S. government with this FOIA lawsuit. But in his FOIA lawsuit, he's got this thing. He's got it all laid out, step by step by step. And he even talks about how one of Bill Clinton's state troopers says to Bill Clinton, I want to go and apply to be in the CIA. And Clinton says, okay, go see my buddy over here in the CIA. And his job interview was a coke run down to Colombia and back to Mena. Okay. You know what I mean? Right. It was a CIA plane.
Oh, yeah.
So,
there's all kinds of those links. When you talk about that, I mean, literally the top Honduran drug lord back in the 80s, Juan Mata Ballesteros, his own company was called Setco. You probably remember that name. Well, that company happened to be hired to send in humanitarian aid, quote-unquote humanitarian aid to the Contras. Now, even though it was known that he was the top drug trafficker in the country, the list goes on and on. The reason why I kind of split those hairs is because I feel like falsely it sort of isolates the CIA when this is really a problem that involves many levels of the federal government. It's U.S. Customs, it's DEA, and to oversimplify these things, yeah, the DEA. I mean, the DEA is basically second fiddle to the CIA. So, in other words, our geopolitical interests go above the drug war. Is, I guess, probably the better way of.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes perfect sense what you're saying. Okay, thank you. Now, what do you think now with Trump in office? Do you think you see any differences? Any kind of that Trump? What do you think?
I don't think I'll see any difference. No. Okay. I would point to the Honduran elections. You familiar with that story? Even if you are, I'm pretty sure some of the audience isn't.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, long story short, last November, Honduras held an election. And within about the halfway point of the election, the opposition candidate, very liberal, left-wing guy, political outsider, was ahead in the polls. And it was very unexpected. So what happened was the election commission basically stopped producing results. And then all of a sudden at the end, when there's about like 1% of the votes left to be cast, they're like, guess what? The incumbent, Juan Orlando Hernandez, is in the driving position here to win. So, and again, I know a lot of people aren't going to be familiar with that name. But Juan Orlando Hernandez, he's the right-wing incumbent, very much an economic and military ally of the U.S., went to school in New York, businessman. When those first results were announced, the bond market in Honduras crashed. And again, a lot of it comes down to economics, because he's very basically a big ally of the World Bank, fiscal responsibility, the kind of stuff that the United States loves as an ally. So obviously, there's a lot of suspicion about that election. Well, all these different, well, I wouldn't say all this, but several different international organizations have said that this sure looks like election fraud. You can look at a really independent source, The Economist, and anybody knows anything about The Economist, it's not a left-leaning hippie rag by any means. And The Economist analyzed the results, and they couldn't say definitively that there was election fraud, but there was, I forget the exact terminology that they used, but basically that it was likely that there was election fraud. So in the face of that, several different international organizations are saying, we need to start this thing over again. We need to have more monitoring. But the United States congratulates them for the win, recognizes them as, and it's basically a long-term trend. And to get back on the drug subject there, anybody knows anything about Honduras, you can look at it. That is a highly corrupted government. I mean, all the way up to the White House. His own brother, the brother of the president, has been brought or was requested to come to Miami as a person of interest in a high-level DEA investigation. His predecessor in office, Pepe Lobo, his own son, is currently in prison in the United States for being a major drug trafficker. And it's all part of, again, you kind of have to go back a little bit in time. Back in 2009, there was a military coup that took place there, and it ousted a left-wing, sort of Maduro, I would say loyalist, or sort of in line with the other socialists in the area. So he was ousted, and the U.S., we kind of played around with the term. We didn't want to use the term coup for a while. Eventually, it was just too obvious. You had to acknowledge that a coup took place. And temporarily, the U.S., we cut off foreign aid to them. And when I say foreign aid, a lot of people are thinking, rice bags for the poor. That's not how we give our foreign aid, especially in Honduras. It's military aid. And we call it like counter narcotics, but it's military aid. So point being that once the Honduras, they launched another election back in 2009, the interim government was it was led by a guy named Billy Hoya. He was the top security person for this, this coup regime. And I don't know if that name rings a bell, but he was actually the head of a right-wing death squad back in the 80s. So he was, on the air, on TV trying to, calm the people. But long story short, what's happened in Honduras, it's been a brutal regime. A lot of people have been killed. A lot of activists have been killed. And our tax dollars are paying for this. Does the name Berta Caceres ring a bell?
It does,
She was an environmental activist down in Honduras, and she was executed by the military, or at least all indications lead to it. And point of what I'm trying to get to is we have all of this sort of military aid or counter-narcotics aid, and we've tried to, or some congressmen like Pat Leahy, they've tried to put human rights restrictions on this, and that never happens. None of that ever actually happens because Honduras and other countries, they are a military and economic ally. We have a pretty big military base there, and we don't want to, our government doesn't want to relinquish that.
So basically you're saying that countries that are friendly to the United States will prop them up using the drug business, but if they're not friendly to the United States, we'll use our drug enforcement money to overthrow their governments.
Yeah, overthrow it or at least harass it. I like to give this sort of, I guess you can oversimplify. You look throughout Latin America, there's a long history to where the military has a corrupt involvement in drug trafficking. Whatever sort of authoritarian leader that they kind of have like a sort of a handshake agreement with the military, you can sort of traffic in all the drugs you want, but you're going to help protect my regime. Any sort of, political activist or whatever, any sort of enemy of the state, you're going to repress that. And it happens on both sides. It happens with the left wing. It happens with the right wing. You see it a lot in Venezuela. We see these kinds of stories all the time. And guess what? That kind of story lands on the front page all the time. Whenever Maduro does something, corrupt, we in America, we know all about it. It's very well known. But when it happens with a right-wing leader, barely ever makes a newspaper, and the U.S. government doesn't really do much about it. If you look at the sanctions list in Venezuela, it is lengthy. So in other words, anybody who has some sort of human rights abuses or allegations of that stuff, we'll put these sanctions on them to where we can take their assets that are here in the U.S., and there's all kinds of other economic pressure that we can put on them. But again, if you look at the other side of the table, it's really kind of astonishing. Let's see, who do I talk about? So I just need a little swig of water right there.
Well then, let me interrupt you for a second, because now when we see these on the news here, right, in Venezuela, and they talk about the food shortages in Venezuela, how much of that is organic, and how much is that caused by the markets, the capitalist markets, holding taking a revenge against Venezuela?
It's a good point. I think it's probably a combination of both. I personally don't think that. I think that you can blame all of Venezuela's problems on the U.S. I do think some of it. It does affect their oil industry, but they basically have everything under control. Everything from the price of bread to water, and there's just this rampant inflation. There's literally black markets to go buy bread or gas or all these kinds of things. I think it is justified to criticize, to give the bulk of the criticism to that government. I do think that's fair.
But when you see stuff like how they expel a bunch of U.S. Embassy workers because they had a plot to shut down the electric grid, the power grid, and then, a month later, the whole power grid goes down, it's kind of like, it's right there in your face. You know?
Oh yeah, and I mean we were when the attempted coup took place in 2002.
Right.
We didn't maybe necessarily actively help coordinate that, but the second Endara, if I remember that was his name, Kamara. When he walks into the palace there, we immediately recognize him as the leader. There was a lot of we had a lot of close ties with the people who were involved with that. So yeah, no, I get what you're saying, and I'm not really taking take a side on it. I'm more just sort of pointing out the hypocrisy of it all. Let's see here.
Well, this is a good time to take a commercial break, okay? We're with Brian Saady.
Okay.
The new book is called America's Drug War is Devastating Mexico. But you really got to check out the body of Brian's work because it's a whole theme, okay? One of the other ones is The Drug War, a $1 trillion con game, decriminalizing prostitution, and then dealing from the bottom of the deck, and pretty much decriminalizing victimless crimes, prostitution, gambling, and the drug war. So check out these other books as well. The Drug War, a $1 trillion con game, decriminalizing prostitution, the Common Sense Solution, dealing from the bottom of the deck, all by Brian Saady. We'll be back with more Brian Saady after these messages from our sponsors. And now a word from our sponsors. Archival Revival, the Christian Film Archive, is currently paying for vintage Christian films. They are dedicated to preserving and restoring classic Christian films and media. So if you have original prints, negatives, or other film elements of classic Christian films, or you have audio recording masters for classic Christian record albums, they want to buy them from you. So email archival.revival@gmail.com and they're going to make you an offer. Archival Revival wants to preserve these classic Christian films so that they continue saving people for years. These films have brought people to salvation. They want to continue that. Their staff has decades of experience in handling and preserving of film elements, utilize the very best climate-controlled film storage facilities around the world. Contact them today at archival.revival@gmail.com. If there's someone you know has these prints, negatives, recording masters, or other materials from vintage Christian films, you can check out their blog at archivalrevival.blogspot.com. Now, just so you understand, Archival Revival wants to pay you for these films. So you can look in your church attic, in the church basement. If you have a friend who runs a Christian youth ministry, these youth vacation Bible study camp, they have these old films in those big metal containers, 16 millimeter and 35 millimeter. Archival Revival wants to buy them from you. So this is a sponsor that actually wants to give you money. And all you have to do is contact them, tell them what you have. If you're in the UK or Ireland or Africa, these films are all over the world and they're gathering dust and they're going to deteriorate if they don't get into the hands of Archival Revival. So that's archival.revival@gmail.com, or the blog spot is archivalrevival.blogspot.com. Don't forget, this show is brought to you by pscoco.com. Phoebe Saad is an independent curator with the Cocoa Exchange. The Cocoa Exchange is formerly known as Dove Chocolate Discoveries, and they make the finest silky smooth chocolate because the products start with the best cocoa beans, which are tested for quality and flavor by expert technicians. The Cocoa Exchange offers not just premium chocolates, but anything from sauces and spices to brownie and cake mixes, and even coffee and martini mixes. If you wish to treat yourself or someone you love to a sweet and tasty gift, then the Cocoa Exchange is the brand for you. So you go to pscoco.com, you click on the Shop Now button. You can see all their beautiful chocolates. You can order it right now tonight. It could be in your mailbox in a couple of days. Or if you want to get into the chocolate business, you want to be a chocolatier just like Phoebe Saad, click the Contact Us button and you can learn how to get your own website, go into the cocoa chocolate business and sell chocolate and make a little bit of money there. Remember, all these shows on Awake are brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com and get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. But we also do all kinds of different services for you. An online dating service investigation. It's called an online infidelity investigation. And that's where you give us your husband or your boyfriend, your girlfriend's email address, and we trace it back to their online dating websites, and we return a list of all the dating sites that email is registered to. We can expand on that investigation and trace it back to porn sites, escort service sites, swinger sites, gambling websites, and even prescription drug websites. If you think your ex-husband or something is addicted to prescription medication, or involved in an extreme online pornography addiction, we can produce a report for you that you can use in court. Adoption investigations. If you want to locate your birth parents or your birth child you gave away for adoption, we can do adoption investigations for you. Asset searches for you. Locate bank accounts, hidden assets, hidden properties, hidden income, all different kinds of services in the asset search investigation. Email tracing. If you need to locate or identify somebody from just an email address, we can do an email trace investigation for you, and all kinds of digital forensics, computer and cell phone digital forensics, where we can recover deleted content from an email or a hard drive and produce a report for you that you can use in court. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can contact me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Before we get back to our guest, Brian Saady, author of this new book, America's Drug War is Devastating Mexico. If you like the show and you like what you hear, make sure you check out OppermanReport.com, where we have our members section. You can go there. You can sign up, become a member. We have all exclusive content, exclusive shows that you won't hear Friday night, you won't hear Saturday night or Sunday night, so only exclusive to members at the website. There's also all kind of lawsuit documents up there. The Trump university lawsuits are up there, Jeffrey Epstein documents and videos and stuff, all different kind of content there at OppermanReport.com, and it helps support the show. But we're here today with Brian Saady. America's Drug War is Devastating Mexico. Now, Brian, I was looking at the description of the book, America's Drug War is Devastating Mexico, and you describe the story of those Mexican students that were kidnapped down there. Now, I actually did a couple of shows on that because my sponsors, I had some sponsors at the time, the New World Mexican Women. They were a jewelry collective. They used to make wholesale jewelry down there, and they were sponsors of the show. And they lived in that town where those students were kidnapped. What did you come up with on that?
A lot.
Okay.
First of all, I would say there's so much of this stuff really doesn't make its way to the news, to the U.S. news. But if you read the Mexican newspapers, the amount of public information, it's really, really stunning. I would say that one of the things that to me was really one of the most disturbing aspects is, okay, so the gang that's responsible for that, they're called Guerreros Unidos, right? And one of the leaders of that gang, he has a brother in the military. And again, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, where the military is often very actively involved in drug trafficking. And the thing with that story that kind of got lost in translation is what it really looks like. Actually, let me back up a touch. Because those students who were kidnapped, they commandeered a bus to go to a protest that was in protest of a massacre that was committed by an anti-government protest in which the Mexican government went in and massacred the protesters. So they were leaving town. They commandeered a bus. But the thing that you have to know is that Los Guerreros Unidos, the gang that's responsible for that, their mode of trafficking was that they would take these passenger buses, and the drugs would go from their territory to Chicago, and they would use these, like I said, these passenger buses. So basically, all indications lead that the drugs were on that bus that they commandeered, and it was that shipment was being supervised by different people within the government. So when they commandeered that bus, that is actually most likely the reason for their death. Some people have said it's for political reasons, all this, when no, it just, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, what's happened, pretty much anybody who follows it can see that there's definitely been a cover-up, a big cover-up. And first of all, again, the fact that the leader of that gang, that his brothers in the military, was withheld. It took, this investigative journalist group in Mexico called Animal Politico. They do just some really amazing investigative journalism. But the fact that the government was withholding every bit of information about this particular guy in the military. Wouldn't give any information. But the biggest thing that I came across that just was so disturbing is that when this investigation was going on, there was a little black book of the gang leader that was confiscated. And in that little black book, it was the names and numbers of all these different political figures. And one of them was the Attorney General's office. And this book magically disappeared during the course of the investigation. And I mean, it's just, there's so many stories like this that you see. And again, it's just so heartbreaking. And again, like I said, the root cause is this war on drugs. That's what's causing most of this corruption, or a great deal of this corruption.
And with those students, were their bodies ever found?
I know one was. And here's another awful thing. In the process of looking for those bodies, they discovered other mass graves. People who are unrelated to that one. There's mass graves all across that country. There's, like I said, I mentioned the 100,000 people who've been murdered in the course of the drug war. Well, there's another 30-something thousand who just disappeared that who are presumed to be dead. So it's really an awful story, and that's also not accounting for the other roughly 280,000 people who are considered domestic refugees. In other words, the violence and the police corruption, it's so bad that they have to leave their homes, or, gangs have taken over their homes or their territory. They have to leave that area, and they're literally a refugee within their own country. Like I said, it's just heartbreaking stuff. It really is.
Yeah, that it really is when you think about it. Now, if we were to legalize all these drugs here in the United States, this would totally cure that situation down there south of the border?
I wouldn't say totally cure it. One of the biggest things is that because they've grown so much in power, you see it a lot. You saw a lot with the mafia, the Italian American mafia. They've diversified. For example, oil theft. It's over about $1.5 billion black market in Mexico, where they steal the money from the oil mines, and it's sold on the black market. So there's a lot of these other crimes that the cartels are deeply involved in. But I would say that you would put a major dent in this criminal activity, because the biggest driver of it is the drug war. I mean, it's the United States. There's about $100 billion market each year for illegal drugs. That's what's driving all this. That's what buys the cops. That's what buys politicians. That's what buys the armament. One of the things I came across was the Jalisco New Generation cartel. That's pretty much the top rival. Some people even say bigger than the Sinaloa cartel. Their armament budget is about $120 million.
Wow.
That's on par with Al-Qaeda. This is, but again, if you can take away those drug profits, they're going to lose. Most of their money is coming in from the drug war. They make a lot of money in extortion, robbery, all this type of stuff, but the real profit comes from the drugs.
Wait, let me ask you a question. They buy those arms from us, or we give it to them?
Well, you heard the Fast and Furious thing.
Yeah.
That's not all of the arms, but yeah, a lot of the drugs. I mean, a lot of the guns are coming from the U.S. So yeah, I mean, you say we. No.
I mean, you said that. You said for the drug war down there that they have $100 billion arms budget.
$1 million.
$100 million. Right. So they buy those arms from us, or we give them those arms.
Oh, no, I would say that's bought on black market, most of that.
Oh, okay.
But
okay.
The root source that's for so many of the guns in this world is the United States. Yeah. It's one of the biggest, producers of guns.
Hey, real quick, what did you come up with Fast and Furious? Did you come up with anything on that?
I didn't look too deeply into that. That is what one of the high-level members of the Sinaloa cartel. Basically, he said that was part of their agreement. But no, I couldn't. I really wouldn't be comfortable, making a definitive statement on that, because it's the kind of thing that gets misconstrued, and I really haven't come up with enough to really put my foot down on that one.
All right, then let me ask you this. Since the last time you've been on the show, and last time we were talking about your other book, the what's that, the $1 Trillion War?
The drug war, $1 trillion con game.
Right. $1 trillion con game. Since you've been on, since then, we've legalized marijuana here in Nevada, recreational marijuana. In California, a rec is about to be legalized, even though it's pretty much been legal with that stupid medical card thing. You go down to Venice Beach, you buy you buy a card. They have some guy in a doctor's scrubs selling you the card, and they're making $10 an hour. They're no doctor. Right. But anyway, what do you think? What do you make of this now? Do you think this is working out, this legalizing marijuana so far?
I think overall it's positive. I mean, Colorado, I would say, is really the real example. I mean, crime's down, but it's paying for a whole lot of just a whole lot of very positive things that used to come directly out of taxpayer and out of our paychecks. This is coming from that's actual revenue from drugs. It's I've seen a lot of evidence that it actually is cutting down on the opioid addiction, and there's a lot of positives. I mean, worst case, you can say we're at a neutral position, but we're making a ton of money on the with the tax revenue. I think it's a real big positive. You're letting the cops pursue actual crime. The thing is, we're still not really in a fully legalized state, even when it is legal. Most of the banks won't take the money from those dispensaries, so it leaves them open to possible money laundering charges. Since they have to do business in cash, it's leaving it open to robberies. So we're still not really there. Plus, you've got Jeff Sessions, who's trying to do everything he can to reverse these laws. There's been a lot of progress made, but yeah, it's the right direction. It absolutely is the right direction.
Well, you think so? Because I notice here in Nevada, because it's just happened. Just the first of the month, it just happened, and the first 24 hours, it was crazy here. Everybody was smoking, it was just insane. Yeah. I got a neighbor here. You can smell it through the walls. This guy, I can't even go into my bathroom sometimes because the smoke's coming through the walls so bad. So everyone has just smoking like crazy. Right. But the cops are still, you go through a whole interrogation when you get pulled over. That's still going on. That hasn't let up at all. Because you can't have pot in your car. Right. You can't smoke in your car. So they're still searching your car. That hasn't stopped a bit, And is it a good idea for so many people to be smoking pot all the time, if it's so available? I don't think so either.
And it gets to a question of were these same people smoking while it was illegal? Did you create new users? And I don't believe that there's any truth to that. When we look at
I can tell you, just from
as far as teenage use.
I don't know about teenagers, but just walking around, people. I know there's plenty of people who haven't smoked since college, or for 20 years, that have ran to the store and bought some. I don't know if they've continued, but there was a run on those stores.
And that leads to the next question: is this just a phase? And I think that in the initial part of this legalization boom, there's going to be people like that. But at the end of the day, marijuana is not a physically addictive drug. I think that some of that, is going to be sort of this rebellious relief in a way, that this stuff's been restricted so long unnecessarily. And in the initial phases, there probably will be some of that. And again, there are negatives to marijuana use. I've never said otherwise. But the whole criminalization thing that makes all of these negatives far worse. You're adding to this prison industrial complex. All of the negatives are magnified far, far worse in a criminalized system. But yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. If suddenly just all of society smoking pot and all that stuff, but the chaos hasn't happened. Colorado's economically one of the states in the whole country to work in. People are still showing up to their jobs. Industry's still moving. So I just don't see that doomsday thing event there at all. I think that overall it will be a very big positive for our country. Absolutely.
Yeah, I've been tempted, to because it's so easy. You just go to a store. I've been tempted to go. I haven't smoked since my 20s. Good 30 years, and I've been tempted to go check it out.
I was in Colorado, not that long ago. I just personally, I just didn't even feel a temptation. I just personally, I don't. Like you're talking about, you do know some adults who suddenly indulge now that they haven't done a long. I don't personally foresee that being a long-term thing. I just think that some of that's almost just I don't know what the term to use for it. But it's, again, this whole thing has been senselessly criminalized for a long time, and it's just, some people are going to act out, but over time, I do see these things coming back to normal. And again, that's what I was talking about before. Teenage usage rates are actually down in states where it is legal. You've taken away that rebellious aspect of it. And that, if you look at that really will point to a positive long-term trend to where, again, you will probably have less adults smoking this stuff. If you're in high school, in a place where marijuana is illegal, it's a lot easier to get marijuana than alcohol. Once you make that legal, you have to have somebody at least who has some sort of fake ID or looks old enough. Legalization makes it tougher for the teenagers to get it.
Yeah, and fake ID these days is practically impossible. You got to use somebody else's ID because you can't make fake ID anymore because they swipe the thing now, that's
a good point.
Yeah, barcode has to work. Yeah, but if you have a sister or a cousin, that looks just like you, then you got a fake ID.
Right, exactly. Some uncle or something will hook you up or something.
That works,
but it makes it more difficult. It actually makes it more difficult for young people to get it. And I just think that it's a huge positive turnaround for legalization.
Yeah, and guys here in Nevada,
it just doesn't work. It causes far more problems.
Yeah, and people here in Nevada that were selling marijuana out of their apartment were selling to teenagers. Now, those guys are out of business because there's just no market for those guys anymore. Oh, boy. Right. Okay, I still, I don't know. I'm uneasy. I'm uneasy about the whole thing with the marijuana. Now, what do you think about Sessions?
I get it. I'm no fan of the idea of, everybody smoking pot. But again, that nightmare scenario hasn't happened. Yeah. And if it hasn't happened in, say, Colorado, then I don't see it happening anywhere else because that was really the experimentation, breaking ground, in a way that the nightmare scenario didn't happen there. It's been overall very positive. And the main thing is just, it's been a big boom for the taxpayer.
Oh, no, money-wise, yeah. It's a money-making operation. It always has been. That I can testify. Now, what about Sessions, though, throwing in this monkey wrench now where he's saying that he wants federal prosecutors to be prosecuting marijuana? Now what?
Right. I mean, there's talk that will actually get Congress to get in motion, which I don't see that happening. That ain't happening for a long time. Not through Congress. The states possibly. Vermont's actually the first state where a bill has actually gone through the legislature. Every other state has been ballot measures. There's just too much special interest against this stuff. But on the flip side, now that this industry is starting to grow, now they're starting to become part of the special interest. And again, I'm not for special interest on either side. It just corrupts the whole system. But yeah, I think that he'll be able to get away with it. Sadly, in my opinion, I didn't think that he would press this hard just because it is a big industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And the vast majority, if you look at the polls, something like 80% of people don't want the federal government involved in this industry. So it's a very unpopular take. So, and for a presidency that's at, some extremely low approval rating. So not a good political move, but he is an ideologue. He believes in that. So I don't know where that's going to go.
Now, what about a couple of years ago, we were driving through Northern California, through wine country and stuff like that, and it seems like it was an open secret that a lot of people were growing marijuana up there. Even on the local radio stations, people that were local marijuana growers were like openly talking about it, and saying how big industry was coming in and buying up their properties and taking over the business and putting them out of business. What do you see with that? Because that seems to be Walmart, Walmart pot we're going to have, and taking over the pot industry.
I've heard that. It is one of those few industries where anybody can jump in.
Right.
I think like any industry, big business tends to run things, but this is it is a business to where the small mom and pop can stay in business. If there's any industry that can fight against that, it is marijuana. So, there's definitely going to be some consolidation, but we really haven't seen that so much. I mean, most of these businesses, these are independent businesses. It's not Walmart, the Walmart of marijuana hasn't taken over yet. So, I mean, I get it. I get that argument, but I think that, again, that's sort of their special interest. When you look at, you're speaking of California, years ago when there was a vote for legalization, one of the biggest concentrations of votes against it were in those grower regions because they wanted it meant less money for them. They were going to get regulated out of the business. So again, it's basically their special interest.
Yeah, and another thing too, I shouldn't forget is that one of the founding fathers of the legalized marijuana movement, Dana Beal, from the New York Yippies over there, just got arrested just recently, the past month, for possession of marijuana. It was a large amount, but still, what the hell? How could they have this one guy sitting in prison right now for 15 years for marijuana, and then they could have a store selling it in Colorado, a store selling it here in Nevada? We need a solution to this for sure.
And the thing is, a guy like him, he has some basic political capital. He has a stronger place in this world. He's not a young, say, black or Latino teenager who gets arrested with that, and it just sort of pushes them into a negative cycle. They're much, somebody like that is much more vulnerable to an arrest. And I hear, the conservatives, they say things like, it's not as strongly criminalized as it was in the past, where that simple bust gets you 10 years. And that's true. We've been shifting towards decriminalization for a while. But, I mean, statistics show once you're in the system, it is tough to get out of that system. Even if you just get probation, I mean, anything can get you sent to prison.
Oh yeah, probation you're guaranteed to get. You're guaranteed to violate probation, parole. But Dana, by the way, is like 78 years old, so this is even a year sentence for him is a life sentence.
Right.
And I got another client just hit me up he's out of the country. He's in a foreign country right now, and they found some marijuana back at his house here in the States, and now he can't come back. He's got a 9-year-old kid. He can't bring his kid back to this country, back to school. He's got to put him in a school in his foreign country because of some stupid arrest back at his house here. So people are still victims of this.
There's millions and millions of those stories, and again, it's for a pointless battle that altogether is based upon a lie. What we're talking about originally, where these source countries for the drugs that come into this country, as long as they're a political ally, we look the other way at it.
Right.
And again, versus say Venezuela. That's what I was going to tell you. There's just so many examples. For me, really, and people are aware of a lot of these. One of the ones that they're really, not aware of, the president of Paraguay. You know what, Brian? No,
we only got 1 minute left. So just tell people where they can get a hold of you and where they could find you, and maybe you'll email them the story about Paraguay, or I'll have you back next time. Or they'll buy your book, man. They'll buy the book, America's Drug War is Devastating Mexico. But how can people get a hold of you?
Well, you can see I'm on multiple social media platforms. My handle is always my name, Brian Saady, BrianSaady. You can check out my website, which is the same URL there, briansaady.com. But I think that if you like this subject, again, I kind of got a little steered off course there, but there's so much to talk about. There's so much to know, and I've written about this subject extensively, several articles, but I go really into a lot more depth on that subject in my book, The Drug War, A $1 Trillion Con Game. And that's just one aspect of the drug war that I talk about. I try to really break down in every aspect. It's not only counterproductive, but it's all based upon one very large, elaborate lie.
Brian, thank you so much, brother. Okay, as soon as you got another book comes out, give me a call, put you right on the air.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, Brian.
so much. I appreciate it.
Good night. Okay, they had Brian Saady, Saady, BrianSaady.com. America's drug war is devastating Mexico. If you like this, check out OppermanReport.com. A lot more content in the member section. You want to be a sponsor? Email me at OppermanReport@gmail.com. Let me tell you. I mentioned some stupid thing about potato juice last week, and I've gotten over 100